And so there's no shortage of people in the room when I'm speaking who get really upset because they have an investment thesis, or maybe they've bet their company on something that I just see as a non-issue. So, obviously the folks in the crypto world have never liked me. And I dropped a video last night about how EVs are just a disaster that aren't going to be with us very much longer. And I've gotten some interesting communications because of that one. Things like this happen with me with almost every presentation. And last year I gave 179 presentations.
What is your perspective on EVs?
They're not nearly as good on carbon as people think. Most of the data that exists doesn't take into the fact that most of this stuff is processed in China, where it's all coal-driven, and it doesn't take into does not take into account the fact that most grids that they run on are also majority fossil fuels, and that extends the break-even time for carbon from 1 year to either 5 or 10, based on what model you're talking on. Cybertruck's far worse than EVs. But the bigger problem is we're just not going to be able to make them much longer. If we really do want to electrify everything, that doesn't just mean EVs, that means the entire system that feeds into the EVs. We need twice as much copper and 4 times as much chromium and 4 times as much nickel and 10 times as much lithium and so on. We have never, ever, in any decade in human history, doubled the amount of a mainline material production in 10 years, ever. And we need all of this by 2030? No, it's just not technically possible.
So how does the government, say, of California, justify these mandates when they're saying something like by 2035, all combustion vehicles must stop being sold in the state of California?
Well, let's put the ideology to the side, because I'm not even going to try to explain that. I will give a little bit of defense for California, though, because I do consider myself a green. I just think of myself as a green who can do math, so I don't get invited to any of the parties. California's state legislature gives a lot of authority to their state bureaucracy. So the bureaucracy will set the goalposts. No ICEs by 2035. Knowing that the technology doesn't exist, knowing that the supply chains don't exist, but they will set the goalposts. If we get closer to that date, say 2027, and it's apparent that the technology is not proceeding at a pace that will allow that target to be reached, they have the authority already to move the goalposts. And they do this on clean air issues. They do this on toxicity. They've done it on nuclear power. They undoubtedly will end up doing it on EVs.
So do you think it's one of those things where there's a bunch of green people who don't do the math?
Oh, yeah.
And it just sounds great. It falls in line with the progressive ideology. We need to, carbon neutral. We can do this. Everyone go electric.
Yeah, and there is a fascinating discussion happening in the environmental community right now because they're being confronted with reality. So California and Germany have very similar green tech policies, but the Germans have spent 3 times as much as California, but are only getting about 1/5 as much power. Because I don't know if you've ever been to Germany, but the sun doesn't shine in Germany. And now with the Russians on the warpath and their clean-ish energy from natural gas going away, they're going back to lignite coal in force. It was already their number one source of power. Germany, the idea that Germany is green is ridiculous because they rely on really, really dirty coal, and now especially so. But there's now a conversation going on between the German environmentalists and the Californian environmentalists about why California, in relative terms, is doing so well at this while Germany is not. And the answer is simple geography. But that's never been part of the conversation in the environmental community before. Now it is. They should have had this conversation 15, 20 years ago, but they're having it now. And as soon as they come to the conclusion, unwillingly, but they'll get there, that we have to choose where we put our copper and our lithium and our nickel, EVs are not going to make the cut at all.
Where will the copper and the nickel and where will all that go?
It'll be focused on the green techs that actually work in the geographic areas where it can be applied. So you put solar panels outside of Tucson, you put wind turbines outside of Tulsa. That works with the technology we have now. You do not put solar panels in Connecticut. That's stupid. That actually increases your carbon footprint.
Because there's no sun.
There's not enough sun to generate enough electricity to pay down the carbon debt that it took to build the stuff in the first place.
There's an ideology in this country that is we must act against climate change or we will die. And there's a lot of people that haven't done the research and haven't really looked into this and really don't know what the numbers are. And they repeat that over and over again like it's a mantra.
It's become a new religion.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm a green, so I broadly believe in the science.
When you say you're a green, what do you mean by that?
Well, I believe that climate change is real, and I believe it's caused by human action, and I believe there are things
Some of it, right?
the bulk of it.
The bulk?
Oh, yeah.
The bulk of climate change you think is caused by humans?
Yeah, no, I mean, the science of it was settled in the 1890s. It's not particularly crazy. Different gases have different albedos and absorption rates. Now, to think that we can predict on a local level what that looks like, we don't have the math for that. We don't have the case studies for that. We do have weather data going back 130 years, which shows some pretty clear trends. We've heated up by about 1.1 degrees Celsius over that time frame, but that has different impacts based on where you are. If you're in the upper Midwest, it's extended growing seasons and gotten rid of some frost. So pretty soon we're going to be double cropping. But if you're in a drier climate like, say, Phoenix or Australia, it's led to wildfires and a breakdown of the agricultural system. So climate change is change. It's not a disaster. It depends on where you are.
So why do you think this ideology has been so pervasive, this ideology that it is a disaster, we're all going to die?
Well, now we're getting into cultural debates.
Yes.
So one of the many aspects of modernization is that people become more connected but live in smaller units. Because as you urbanize, you have fewer kids. And that means that people are looking for other ways to belong because the old traditional methods of, family and farm aren't as tight as they used to be. And so this is much more further advanced in places like Japan or Europe than it is in the United States. But it's happening here too. And when you're looking for social opportunities, politics are a way that can reach across the geographic distances, no matter where you happen to be. And you can use social media and tech to communicate with people who have a belief system that you find attractive for whatever reason. And so the same thing that makes the environmental community more potent, if less informed, is exactly the same thing that brought Donald Trump to power, because you got people who felt like they were on the outside of a society who all of a sudden could link into one another. It's a technology conversation from my point of view.
Whew. So do you drive an electric vehicle? Or
No,
do you just
God, no.
opposed to that?
I live at
Totally.
7,500 feet in Colorado. That would be suicide.
Why is it bad up there at 7,500 feet?
They don't deal well with inclement weather. They don't
They're
deal
not
well
good
with
with
cold.
Right.
Yeah.
They're fun to drive, though. You ever drive
No,
one?
it's like, no, for people who enjoy it for the driving experience, go for it. Just don't pretend that you're being an environmentalist.